April 18, 1943, 0347 hours, 180 meters beneath the Tyrrhenian Sea, 12 kilometers southwest of the Strait of Messina. Korvettenkapitän Hans-Werner Krauss, commander of U-616, veteran of 17 Atlantic patrols, decorated with the Knight's Cross for sinking 42,000 tons of Allied shipping, stood in his control room studying the depth gauge with growing contempt. Through the hydrophones, his crew could hear them, American destroyers churning above, their primitive propellers creating a cacophony that any properly trained Kriegsmarine sonarman could identify from kilometers away. The Americans, Krauss wrote in his log that morning, his pen strokes heavy with disdain, hunt submarines like farmers chasing chickens. Loud, predictable, clumsy. They drop their charges in patterns so regular you could set your chronometer by them. Their depth charges, if they can even be called that, explode harmlessly above us while we sit comfortably at 180 meters, listening to their frustration. Through the periscope during a brief glimpse at dawn, Krauss had observed the American destroyer escorts, the new DE-class vessels that the United States Navy was producing at an absurd rate. To German U-boat commanders accustomed to the deadly efficiency of British corvettes and destroyers, these American ships appeared almost comical, boxy, utilitarian, built with visible welds that any Blohm and Voss craftsman would have rejected as shoddy work. Their depth charge racks looked like agricultural equipment bolted to the stern. Their sonar domes protruded awkwardly from hulls that seemed designed by engineers who had never seen the ocean. What Krauss didn't know, what none of the Kriegsmarine submarine commanders could have imagined, was that he was hearing the acoustic signature of the weapon system that would systematically destroy Germany's U-boat fleet more thoroughly than any military force in history. Within 18 months, these objects of derision would transform from punchlines in German officer messes into instruments of absolute terror beneath the Atlantic. The laughter would die in the throats of men who dove too deep, stayed down too long, and discovered that the Americans had rewritten the mathematics of undersea warfare. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those ungainly American ships. Depth charges that could reach 300 meters, sonar that could track submarines through temperature layers German commanders thought were impenetrable, ahead-throwing weapons that could bracket a submarine before it even knew it was targeted, and production capacity that would put 1,400 of these primitive submarine hunters into service. More anti-submarine vessels than Germany had built of all types since 1935. The crisis had begun on September 1, 1939, when U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner Athenia west of the Hebrides. For the next 3 years, German U-boats savaged Allied shipping with methodical efficiency. From September 1939 through March 1942, U-boats sank 2,226 Allied merchant vessels totaling 11.3 million tons. The convoy system that had worked in the First World War was breaking down. Britain's oil reserves fell to 3 months' supply. The statistical projection was merciless. If sinking rates continued, Britain would be starved into surrender by mid-1943. Kapitän Lieutenant Reinhard Hartigan, commanding U-123, arrived off the American East Coast in January 1942 during Operation Drumbeat. The shipping he found was barely defended. Merchants sailing independently, cities ablaze with light, navigational beacons operating as if no war existed. "It is almost embarrassing," Hartigan wrote. "It is like shooting fish in a barrel. The Americans have learned nothing." In his first patrol, Hartigan sank 9 ships totaling 53,173 tons, including tankers that burned so brightly their flames were visible from shore. The statistics were catastrophic. In American waters during the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats sank 397 ships. The rate peaked in November 1942 at 729,160 tons lost in 30 days. Merchant mariners faced a 25% casualty rate, higher than any American military branch. Oil slicks and wreckage littered beaches from Florida to Massachusetts. Bodies washed ashore for months. American anti-submarine efforts were failing comprehensively. The handful of aging destroyers assigned to coastal patrol lacked sufficient range and endurance. Their British-supplied ASDIC sonar was effective only in perfect conditions. Their depth charges were Mark VI models designed in 1917. Maximum setting of 91 meters when U-boats routinely operated at 120 to 180 meters. Coastal patrol aircraft were mostly obsolete types without proper radar or sufficient range. The few dedicated anti-submarine vessels in service required 18 months to build and used materials desperately needed for fleet destroyers. Of the solutions attempted, 3 had failed spectacularly. Armed merchant cruisers proved too slow to catch surfaced U-boats and too lightly armed to fight them. Dirigibles and blimps provided good visibility, but couldn't attack submerged contacts. The PC-461 class submarine chasers were too small for Atlantic service. 173 feet long, they were death traps in winter storms, with crews suffering 40% casualty rates from weather alone before engaging any enemy. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, described the situation in March 1942 with brutal honesty. The rate of sinkage is so serious that if continued, it would prevent the buildup of forces in the United Kingdom necessary for a return to the continent. We are not only failing to protect our shipping, we are failing even to make the enemy pay a price for his successes. The U-boats operate with near impunity. The strategic imperative was absolute. Operation Overlord was scheduled for 1944. Without secure Atlantic supply lines, invasion was impossible. The solution emerged from Bureau of Ships headquarters in Washington, D.C. in late 1941. Captain Edward Cochrane, chief of the Bureau's Design Division, received specifications from Admiral King's Anti-Submarine Warfare Board that seemed designed to guarantee failure. They needed a submarine hunter that could be built by shipyards that had never constructed a warship. That could be produced in 4 months instead of 18. That could cross the Atlantic in winter storms. That could track and kill U-boats operating at depths beyond current depth charge range. And they needed not dozens, they needed hundreds. Immediately. It's not possible with any design we have, Cochrane admitted to his engineering team in November 1941. Every requirement contradicts another. Fast enough to catch U-boats means destroyer-type power plants. But destroyers require skilled builders and turbines we don't have enough of. Cheap and fast to build means merchant ship techniques. But merchant ships are too slow. We need something that doesn't exist. The revolutionary design choice was to abandon naval architectural tradition entirely. Instead of trying to build simplified destroyers, they would build weaponized merchant vessels. The hull would use merchant marine construction, diesel engines instead of steam turbines, simple reciprocating machinery instead of complex reduction gears, welding instead of riveting. But the weapon systems would be purely military. The newest sonar, the deepest reaching depth charges, and a revolutionary weapon called the Hedgehog that threw contact-fused projectiles ahead of the ship. Chief Naval Architect George Sharp designed the propulsion around General Motors, diesels, the same engines, going into Liberty ships and fleet oilers. Each ship would have 2 diesel-electric drive systems producing 6,000 horsepower. Not impressive compared to a destroyer's 60,000 horsepower, but sufficient for 21 knots and vastly simpler to maintain. The hull was 306 feet long with a destroyer-type bow for seakeeping, but a merchant ship's stern for ease of construction. Armament included 3-inch guns, 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons, and 8 depth charge projectors that could drop patterns of 13 charges reaching 180 meters depth. The key innovations were fourfold. First, prefabrication. Entire sections were built inland and shipped to coasts for final assembly. Second, simplification. They eliminated everything non-essential. Third, standardization. Every DE would be identical, with parts interchangeable across the entire class. Fourth, training integration. The ships were designed to be operated by reservists and merchant marine veterans, not career Navy. The trade-off was clear. These would not be fleet destroyers. They lacked the speed for carrier escort or surface combat. Their gun armament couldn't fight a surface engagement against anything larger than a submarine. They sacrificed elegance, prestige, and naval tradition for one capability. They could find submerged U-boats and kill them. The prototype, USS Brennan DE-13, first entered the water on January 20, 1943, at the Dravo Corporation shipyard in Pittsburgh. Built on the Monongahela River by workers who had been building river barges 18 months earlier. Her specifications shocked Navy observers. Displacement, 400 tons. Length, 306 feet. Beam, 37 feet. Draft, 14 feet. Top speed, 21 knots, barely adequate. Range, 6,000 miles at 12 knots, double most destroyers. Armament, weapons that could hit a submarine at depths German commanders thought were sanctuary. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, assigned as prospective commanding officer during trials, reported, "She rolls like a pig in any seaway. She's slow. She's ungainly. She looks like a floating shoebox. And I have never seen a vessel more perfectly designed for exactly one purpose. Everything aboard exists to find submarines and kill them. Nothing else matters." The hidden advantage was in the details. The destroyer escorts carried the QHB sonar, latest model with range exceeding 2,000 yards even through temperature layers. The depth charges were Torpex-filled Mark IX models with settings to 300 meters. The Hedgehog threw 24 contact-fused projectiles in an elliptical pattern 250 yards ahead, eliminating the dead time when a ship lost sonar contact passing over a submarine. And the diesel-electric drive was nearly silent at slow speeds, allowing the sonar operators to hear everything while the U-boat's hydrophones heard almost nothing. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, commanding Escort Division 13, initially despised the destroyer escorts. A career destroyer officer with service dating to 1925, he viewed the DE program as an insult to the Navy's shipbuilding heritage. "They've given us a fleet of motorized tugboats," he wrote to his wife in February 1943, "and expect us to fight the Kriegsmarine's finest with them." Training disasters confirmed his prejudices. Escort Division 13 lost 2 officers and 9 enlisted men in accidents. Between February and April 1943, the destroyer escorts were so different from traditional warships that experienced destroyer sailors made fatal mistakes. Ensign Robert Chen, a reservist from San Francisco, died on March 8 when he engaged the wrong clutch during a crash maneuver. The diesel-electric drive had reversed his expectations, and USS Brennan's stern crushed him against the pier. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Wakefield drowned on March 22 when seas swept him from Brennan's deck during North Atlantic trials. The low freeboard that made depth charge loading easier also made the ships dangerously wet and heavy. Whether the destroyer escorts killed more Americans in training than U-boats would in their first 6 months of combat. Ships broached in following seas. Sonar operators trained on older equipment couldn't interpret the QHB's detailed returns and reported phantom contacts. Gun crews accustomed to the stable platforms of fleet destroyers couldn't adapt to the violent rolling. Depth charge crews accidentally armed charges on deck, leading to 3 near disasters when primers activated prematurely. It ground looped in turns if you applied rudder too aggressively. One ship handling instructor reported. It rolled 35 degrees in moderate seas. It pitched so violently the sonar dome came clear out of the water if you took waves at wrong angle. The diesel engines, for all their simplicity, seized if you didn't nurse them through temperature changes. We were teaching experienced destroyer sailors, and they couldn't keep these vessels upright, let alone fight them. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Wilcox, from Des Moines, Iowa, 26 years old, former merchant marine officer, would become one of the war's most successful submarine hunters. His first experience with the destroyer escort's capabilities came during April 1943 training exercises off Block Island. USS Bronstein, under Wilcox's command, was tracking a friendly submarine playing enemy in a practice attack. The sonar return was so clear I could hear the target submarine's propeller count, Wilcox later recalled. "On a destroyer with legacy sonar, you got a ping and a bearing. On Bronstein, I could tell you the target's depth, speed, aspect, and whether they were rigging for silent running. It was like going from blindness to sight. And when we dropped our practice charges, set shallow for the exercise, they bracketed the submarine so precisely the umpires ended the exercise immediately. If those had been live weapons at full depth settings, that submarine would have ceased to exist. I realized then that we weren't driving inferior vessels. We were driving specialized killing machines that happened to be ugly." The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. Destroyer escort groups assigned to the North Atlantic convoys couldn't maintain position in heavy weather. The violent rolling disrupted radar and sonar. American crews, many on their first Atlantic crossing, were desperately seasick. The ships were so wet that depth charges had to be secured beyond normal safety protocols, slowing reload times. The low-pressure diesel engines lost power in the cold, reducing already marginal speed. The destroyer escorts couldn't outrun surfaced U-boats in pursuit. Where a fleet destroyer could hit 35 knots and run down a surface submarine, the DEs topped out at 21 knots, barely faster than a U-boat on the surface in calm seas. Couldn't match a destroyer's sustained high-speed operations across the Atlantic. Couldn't fight surface engagements against German destroyers if convoy defense required it. Korvettenkapitän Peter Gerlach, commander of U-134, reported after tracking convoy HX-237 in late April. The Americans have deployed a new type of escort, smaller than destroyers, much slower. They roll abominably. We observed one ship with its sonar dome entirely out of water during a trough. Their station keeping is poor. In a surface action, a single German destroyer would sink 3 of them before they could respond. They are clearly stopgaps, built by a nation that knows it cannot produce real warships in sufficient numbers. These are merchant ships with guns, nothing more. They would be tragic if they were not so pathetic. In their first month of combat operations, Atlantic destroyer escort groups lost 4 merchant ships from convoys under their protection for only one possible U-boat kill, and that was never confirmed. British escort commanders, veterans of 3 years of Atlantic warfare, quietly suggested the Americans needed more training. Royal Navy sailors joked that DE stood for damn embarrassing and that the ships were destroyers in name only. But something strange was happening that German intelligence failed to notice. The destroyer escorts, when they did make contact with submerged U-boats, held that contact with supernatural persistence. The QHB sonar could track through temperature layers and at ranges that left U-boat commanders confused about how they'd been detected. The Americans' depth charges were reaching depths German submarines had considered safe since 39 boats diving to 150 or 180 meters were suddenly experiencing near misses at depths where they should have been untouchable. American destroyer escorts absorbed incredible punishment from North Atlantic weather before suffering critical damage. Specific example, USS Thomas on April 28, 1943, encountered a force 10 storm while escorting convoy on 5. She rolled 52 degrees, far enough that her starboard depth charge racks were submerged. Waves stove in her forward gun shield. Flooding reached the forward magazine. Green water swept the bridge, injuring the executive officer and washing 2 lookouts overboard. She lost her radar antenna, and one of her depth charge projectors was torn completely off its mounting, damage that would have sent most destroyers back to port for repairs. Thomas continued her patrol, made sonar contact 2 days later, and sank U-438 with a perfect depth charge pattern despite operating with half her weapons offline. When the destroyer escorts did get weapons on target, the results were catastrophic. The Torpex filling in the Mark 9 depth charges produced blast effects 50% more powerful than TNT. A near miss at 200 meters could rupture a pressure hull. A close hit simply obliterated the submarine, not sinking it but literally crushing the hull into scrap metal while it was still submerged. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on May 6, 1943, precisely 02:14 hours, 140 kilometers southwest of Iceland, in seas running 4-meter swells under overcast skies. It involved Lieutenant Commander Eugene Elmore, commanding officer of USS Buckley DE-51, and an encounter that would become legendary in anti-submarine warfare history. Buckley's hunter-killer group of 4 destroyer escorts was conducting a barrier patrol when USS Donaldson made sonar contact at 02:08 hours. Buckley's sonar operator, sonarman First Class James Parker from Milwaukee, former Great Lakes fisherman, confirmed contact at 1-800 yards, bearing 273 degrees. Contact solid and closing, Parker reported. Doppler indicates target is diving. Depth estimate 120 meters and increasing. The submarine was U-66, commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Gerhard Seehausen, veteran of 22 war patrols, personally credited with sinking 16 ships totaling 97,000 tons. Seehausen had detected the escort group's approach on hydrophones and was executing standard evasion, diving deep, turning toward the escorts to present minimum sonar cross-section, then rigging for silent running to disappear into the acoustic clutter. We executed the maneuver perfectly, Seehausen later recounted during interrogation. At 180 meters below the temperature layer, we should have been invisible. Our hydrophone operator reported the escorts passing overhead. The thrashing of their propellers, so loud, so unsophisticated compared to British escorts, faded to port. I began planning to surface after 30 minutes for battery recharge. Then our hydrophone operator reported something impossible. One escort had turned back. And it was slowing, decelerating to speeds where its machinery noise should make it deaf. But its active sonar was finding us through the temperature layer. Every ping was hitting us directly. They knew exactly where we were. Buckley's QHB sonar had tracked U-66 through the temperature layer at 140 meters depth with perfect fidelity. Commander Elmore maneuvered his ship to attack position, slowing to 8 knots to give his sonar the quietest possible platform. At 0221 hours, with range at 300 yards and tracking solution perfect, Elmore ordered, "Fire Hedgehog." 24 Hedgehog projectiles, each containing 35 pounds of Torpex, each fitted with contact fuses that would only detonate on direct hit, arced ahead of Buckley in their elliptical pattern. Time of flight 17 seconds. The projectiles entered the water 250 yards ahead of the ship, covering an ellipse 140 feet wide and 120 feet long. At 180 meters depth, traveling at depths U-66's crew thought made them invulnerable, the submarine sailed directly into the pattern. Seehausen's damage report, reconstructed from survivor testimony, was catastrophic. 3 Hedgehog projectiles impacted U-66's pressure hull, 1 forward of the conning tower, 1 amidships, 1 aft. The forward hit ruptured the bow torpedo room. All 6 men inside died instantly as the Atlantic entered at 180 meters depth, with pressure exceeding 260 pounds per square inch. The amidships hit exploded against the control room pressure hull, opening a crack 12 feet long. Lights failed instantly. Chlorine gas began pouring from batteries. The aft hit destroyed the engine room, killing all 4 engineering crew on watch. Hydraulic pressure failed immediately. Compressed air systems ruptured. Ballast tank controls ceased functioning. Depth gauge showed 200 meters and increasing. We were dead, Seehausen recalled. The submarine was flooding in 3 compartments. We had no control. We were falling deeper. At that depth, with those ruptures, we had perhaps 90 seconds before the entire pressure hull would implode. I ordered emergency blow, using our last compressed air to force water from the ballast tanks. It was suicidal. We would surface directly beneath an enemy escort. But we were already dead if we stayed submerged. U-66 broke surface at 0224 hours, 150 yards from Buckley's bow. Seehausen ordered the crew to abandon ship immediately. There would be no fight, no heroic last stand. The pressure hull was already collapsing internally. He could hear bulkheads buckling. What happened next stunned both crews. Buckley maneuvered alongside at ramming speed. But Commander Elmore, seeing German crewmen pouring from the conning tower, many wounded, ordered hard right rudder at the last moment, turning to bring his ship parallel to the submarine rather than ramming. Those men were already defeated, Elmore wrote in his action report. Ramming would have been murder, not warfare. Buckley's crew threw cargo nets and life rings to the German sailors in the water. U-66 remained on surface for 4 minutes before the pressure hull finally collapsed. She went down by the bow, stern rising nearly vertical, the propellers still turning slowly. Seehausen was pulled from the water unconscious, hypothermic but alive. 24 of his crew of 48 survived. The destruction of U-66 sent shockwaves through both navies. This was not a depth charge attack where the submarine might have escaped with damage. This was not a long hunt where the submarine exhausted batteries and was forced to surface. This was surgical precision. 1 attack, 3 direct hits, submarine destroyed in 3 minutes from initial contact to sinking. And the weapon had been something German U-boat commanders had never encountered. Projectiles thrown ahead of the escort, exploding only on contact, giving the submarine no warning, no time to evade, no chance to escape. American engineers studying Seehausen's testimony realized they'd fundamentally underestimated what they'd created. The Hedgehog, combined with the QHB sonar, had eliminated every advantage that deep diving provided. German submarines could no longer hide below temperature layers, could no longer wait out depth charge attacks at crush depth, could no longer escape by diving deeper than the charges could reach. The destroyer escorts, for all their ungainly appearance, had technological superiority in the only domain that mattered, finding submerged U-boats and killing them before they even knew they'd been targeted. German naval. Intelligence receiving reports from survivors initially refused to believe it. No escort vessel could track through temperature layers with such precision. No depth charge could reach 180 meters and still have enough explosive force to rupture a pressure hull. No weapon could bracket a submarine maneuvering evasively at 200 meters depth, with accuracy measured in meters rather than tens of meters. The reports had to be exaggerated, shock and hypothermia distorting memories. But testimony from multiple U-boat commanders confirmed the impossible. Captain Lieutenant Johann Moore, commanding U-124, survived an attack by USS Chatelaine on May 19th when his pressure hull cracked at 175 meters, but held long enough to emergency surface. During interrogation at a Canadian POW facility, he provided technical testimony. The explosions were not above us, as with depth charges. They were all around us, forward, aft, port, starboard, but all at our exact depth. The pressure waves converged on the submarine simultaneously from multiple directions. It was not depth charging. It was something else entirely. Precise. Targeted. As if they could see us through the water and were firing directly at us rather than dropping charges and hoping for proximity kills. And the explosive force, I commanded a Type 9B with pressure hull designed for 250 meters maximum depth. These explosions at 175 meters nearly imploded the hull. Whatever explosive they're using, it's more powerful than anything we've encountered. By June 1943, American destroyer escort commanders were learning to exploit their ship's true strengths. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding Escort Carrier Group 21.12 built around USS Guadalcanal with 4 destroyer escorts, discovered the secret through brutal trial and error during North Atlantic operations. Gallery's tactical briefing to his destroyer escort commanders, recorded in June 1943, became doctrine: don't try to be destroyers. You're not fast enough, not heavily armed enough, and frankly not pretty enough. But you have something destroyers don't: endurance and sonar that works. Your job is to be persistent. Track them through the layers. Hold contact when they dive deep. Stay on top of them for hours if necessary. Force them to stay submerged until their batteries die. And when they surface, that's when you close for the kill. Your 3-inch gun will hold a pressure hull just fine at 2,000 yards. Your depth charges will break their keel if they try to crash dive. Use your advantages. You can stay at sea for 30 days. They can stay submerged for 30 hours. Simple mathematics. The destroyer escort's persistence became a weapon. The diesel-electric drive gave them 6,000-mile range at economical speed. They could cross the Atlantic, patrol for 2 weeks, and return without refueling. U-boats with battery capacity for 80 miles submerged at 4 knots couldn't outlast them. If a destroyer escort made contact and held it, the submarine was already defeated. It was just a matter of time until the batteries died and surface became mandatory. Specific capability. From convoy escort station, a destroyer escort could accelerate to 21 knots and reach a sonar contact at 4,000 yards in under 8 minutes. Once on contact, the ship could slow to 8 knots for optimal sonar conditions while still maintaining position over the submarine. The U-boat, attempting to evade at 6 knots submerged, couldn't outrun the tracking solution, and every maneuver the submarine made to evade drained batteries faster, reducing the time until forced surfacing from hours to minutes. Lieutenant Commander John Cromwell, commanding USS Frost DE-144, developed what became known as the exhaustion doctrine. When sonar made contact, Frost would slow to bare steerageway and simply follow the submarine. Don't attack immediately, Cromwell briefed his crew. Track them. Learn their pattern. Let them waste battery power trying to evade. If they dive deeper, follow them down with the sonar. If they slow to minimum speed, we slow too. If they try to sneak away, the sonar holds them. After 2 hours, they're getting desperate. After 4 hours, they're making mistakes. After 6 hours, they have to surface or die. That's when we attack, when they're out of options. German submarine commanders who encountered this tactic described it as psychological torture. Forgotten Captain Karl Dönitz, commanding U-boat operations, received report after report of the same pattern. American escorts making contact, then maintaining tracking for hours without attacking. The crew inside the submarine could hear the escort's active sonar pinging. Each ping a reminder that the Americans knew exactly where they were. Battery power draining. Carbon dioxide levels rising. No escape, no way to fight back. just waiting in the dark for the inevitable moment when ballast tanks would have to be blown and the submarine would surface into American guns. The true revelation came during June 18, 1943, southwest of the Azores. This mission would demonstrate both the destroyer escort's brutal effectiveness and the merciless efficiency of the American anti-submarine campaign. Captain Gallery's escort carrier group, 2112, had launched aircraft from USS Guadalcanal to track a Wolfpack assembling for attack on convoy US-8. The Wildcat fighters and Avenger torpedo bombers located 5 submarines attempting to coordinate positions for a night surface attack, the classic German tactic that had destroyed so many convoys in 1942. But in June 1943, the equation had changed. Gallery dispatched his 4 destroyer escorts, USS Pillsbury, Pope, Flaherty, and Chatelain, to coordinates provided by the aircraft. The destroyer escorts, with their extended range and endurance, could maintain high speed toward the contacts for hours without concern for fuel. The U-boats, detecting the aircraft and knowing escorts were coming, dove deep and scattered. For the next 31 hours, Gallery's group hunted them systematically. The destroyer escorts worked in pairs, one maintaining sonar contact while the other maneuvered for attack position. The carrier-based aircraft provided daytime coverage, forcing any submarine that surfaced to attempt battery recharge to immediately dive again, draining batteries faster. At night, the destroyer escort's radar could detect surface submarines at ranges exceeding 8,000 yards. There was no escape. No safe time to surface, no way to recharge, no reinforcement coming. USS Chatelain made the first kill at 0430 hours on June 19th. U-575, forced to surface with batteries completely dead after 17 hours submerged, broke water 4,000 yards from Chatelain's bow. Lieutenant Commander Alvin Price maneuvered to attack, while his 3-inch gun crew opened fire. The gun accuracy was devastating. At this range, against a stationary target, American gunners trained on towed sleeves and radio-controlled drones didn't miss. The first round penetrated U-575's pressure hull aft of the conning tower. The second struck the conning tower itself, killing everyone inside. The third entered the forward torpedo room, detonating warheads. U-575 exploded with such violence that witnesses reported seeing the pressure hull tear in half before sinking. Of her crew of 52, there were no survivors. Oberleutnant zur See Friedrich Breuker, commanding U-129, monitored the engagement on hydrophones from 14 kilometers away. His report, written later in POW interrogation, revealed the psychological impact. "We heard the gunfire. We heard the explosions. We heard U-575's death throes, the sounds of pressure hull collapse, bulkheads imploding, torpedo warheads detonating. Those sounds travel far underwater. Every man in my crew heard our comrades dying, and we knew we faced the same fate. Our batteries were at 30%. We had perhaps 6 more hours submerged. The American escorts hadn't lost contact with us for 11 hours. They knew exactly where we were. We were just waiting our turn to die." USS Pillsbury killed U-645 at 1420 hours, another battery-exhausted submarine forced to surface. USS Pope sank U-616 at 1910 hours with a Hedgehog attack, while the submarine was still submerged at 165 meters. U-129 and U-218 survived by pushing their batteries beyond all safety limits, remaining submerged for 22 and 19 hours respectively, until darkness allowed surface escape under cover of a rain squall. 3 U-boats destroyed in 31 hours. Each one tracked from initial contact to sinking. 0 American casualties, not 1 merchant ship lost. The Wolfpack that was supposed to destroy convoy GUS-8 had instead been systematically exterminated. By August 1943, the Kriegsmarine was discovering another horrifying reality. The destroyer escorts had been designed from the beginning to operate in groups with escort carriers, creating hunter-killer groups with both aerial surveillance and surface persistence. The combination was lethal beyond anything the U-boat arm had encountered. Aircraft forced submarines to remain submerged during daylight, draining batteries. Destroyer escorts tracked the submerged submarines with sonar, maintaining contact through any evasion attempt. When darkness fell and aircraft returned to the carrier, the destroyer escort's radar found any submarine attempting surface recharge. The U-boats faced a weapon system with no temporal or spatial gaps. They were hunted continuously. With every advantage they'd possessed since 1939, systematically negated. Technical explanation. The destroyer escorts. QHB sonar operated at frequencies between 18 and 46 kHz, well above the human hearing range but perfect for penetrating temperature layers. The system could determine target depth by measuring time difference between direct path returns and surface bounce returns. Skilled operators like sonarman Parker could estimate submarine speed by Doppler shift in the return frequency. Target aspect, whether submarine was bow on, beam on, or stern on, could be determined by return strength variation. Against German submarines rigged for silent running, making barely 2 knots, the QHB could maintain tracking contact at ranges exceeding 1,800 yards. This gave destroyer escorts 6 to 8 minutes to maneuver into attack position before crossing directly over the submarine. Vastly more time than depth charge attacks allowed. High-ranking. German ace Fregattenkapitän Erich Topp, one of Germany's most successful submarine commanders with 35 ships sunk totaling 197,000 tons, encountered this reality on August 7, 1943, while commanding U-552 north of the Azores. His combat report, filed after returning to base with severe damage, revealed the complete shift in tactical advantage. We were transiting on surface at 2200 hours, charging batteries when radar detector activated. American aircraft. We crash dived to 160 meters and rigged for silent running. Their aircraft could not have maintained contact. It was dark. We were deep before they arrived. But 20 minutes later, active sonar found us. Continuous tracking. Precise. We attempted standard evasion, turning toward the sound beam, slowing to minimum speed, hovering at 180 meters. The sonar held us perfectly. For 6 hours they tracked us. We could hear propellers above, could hear their active pinging, could hear them communicating with other escorts. In clear language, they weren't even concerned about security. They owned the ocean. At 0410 hours, air nearly depleted, battery at 12%, we had no choice. Emergency surface. As we broke water, their radar found us instantly. Gunfire from 2 escorts simultaneously. We managed to dive again, barely. Took massive damage. Lost 1 crew member. Limped back to France submerged for 8 days. The Americans didn't pursue. They moved on to find other submarines. We weren't worth their time to finish. That was somehow worse than if they'd sunk us. We were beneath contempt. Top survival made him valuable for analysis. German Naval Command ordered him to write comprehensive tactical assessment. His report, dated August 1943, was deemed too demoralizing to distribute beyond senior command. The American anti-submarine capability has achieved qualitative and quantitative superiority in every domain. Their escorts are numerous beyond counting. Where we sink 1, 10 more appear. Their sonar penetrates every depth, every temperature layer we use for concealment. Their ahead-throwing weapons remove the final seconds of warning that depth charges provided. Their coordination between air and surface forces creates continuous tracking. Most critically, their tactics demonstrate they understand our capabilities better than we understand theirs. They are patient, methodical. They don't need to be aggressive when they can simply wait for our batteries to fail. We are no longer hunters. We are hunted. And the mathematics of battery endurance versus their patrol endurance means we cannot win. In September 1943, an improved variant began arriving that would complete the transformation. The destroyer escort DE-339 class featured General Motors 16 to 278A diesel engines producing 6,000 horsepower with improved fuel efficiency. The new engines increased range from 6,000 to 6,500 miles and raised top speed from 21 to 23 knots. Not a dramatic increase, but enough to close the gap against surfaced U-boats attempting to flee. The improvement was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier destroyer escorts had barely been faster than surface submarines in ideal conditions, the new variants could maintain pursuit speed in moderate seas. This eliminated the submarine's last surface advantage, the ability to outrun escorts on the surface at night when aircraft couldn't operate. Additional capability gained. The new ships incorporated improved radar. The SL surface search variant with discrimination good enough to detect periscopes at 2,000 yards in calm seas. Submarine commanders who attempted periscope observations before surfacing found themselves immediately targeted. The safe practice of reconnaissance before surfacing became a death sentence. Oberleutnant zur See Werner Hartenstein, commanding U-156, veteran of 21 patrols, encountered the new variants in October 1943 during attempted attack on convoy UGS-20 west of Gibraltar. His war diary entry, recovered after U-156 was sunk by aircraft on March 8, 1944, described the encounter. They have improved the escorts. These new vessels are faster. We observed one maintaining 22 knots in force 5 seas that should have reduced them to 18 knots. They have new radar that detected our periscope at ranges we thought were safe for observation. Most disturbing, they seem to be everywhere. Where convoys once had 4 or 6 escorts, now they have 12, 14, 16. We attempted to shadow convoy for attack position. 8 escorts broke formation and pursued us specifically. 8 vessels dedicated to hunting 1 submarine. We maintained surface speed for 40 minutes. They maintained pursuit without difficulty. We were forced to dive. They held contact for 7 hours until we exhausted batteries. Only a sudden fog bank allowed surface escape. My crew's morale is shattered. What is the point of patrol if we cannot even approach convoys? The new destroyer escorts created a distinctive diesel rumble that could be identified through hydrophones from kilometers away. German submariners reported being able to distinguish the General Motors diesels from British and Canadian escorts by sound signature alone. They began calling it Das Brummen, the humming, because the diesel-electric drive at cruise speed created a low-frequency throb that penetrated water more effectively than the high-frequency whine of steam turbines. By November 1943, destroyer escorts equipped with extended-range fuel tanks could transit from New York to the Mediterranean, patrol for 14 days, and return without refueling. The statistics were brutal. Atlantic crossing required 3,000 miles outbound. Mediterranean patrol areas lay another 2,000 miles beyond Gibraltar. The destroyer escorts made the 10,000-mile round trip routinely. German U-boats attempting to interdict the Mediterranean sea lift faced American escorts that could maintain station off the African coast for weeks, then pursue U-boat contacts across hundreds of miles without concern for fuel state. Configuration carried 75,000 gallons of diesel fuel in standard tanks plus 50,000 gallons in auxiliary bladders, 400 depth charges with mix of Torpex and standard explosive, 144 Hedgehog rounds with resupply from tenders, ammunition for all guns sufficient for extended engagement. This extended combat endurance to levels German submarines simply couldn't match. New capability impact. Destroyer escorts could pursue U-boats attempting to flee to distant operating areas after being depth charged. The German tactic of absorbing damage, escaping the immediate area, then surfacing for emergency repairs no longer worked. The destroyer escorts maintained pursuit for hundreds of miles, forcing submarines to remain submerged until battery exhaustion or structural failure. The Kriegsmarine's response was to attempt night surface attacks, hoping to engage the destroyer escorts with deck guns before the Americans could respond. But this required closing to ranges under 2,000 yards, suicidal against vessels mounting 3-inch guns with radar fire control, and crews trained to fire at surface targets at night. The few U-boats that attempted gun battles were massacred. U-333, attempting to engage USS Gandhi on November 17th, was struck by 7 3-inch rounds in 90 seconds of firing. The pressure hull was penetrated in 4 places. The conning tower was destroyed. The submarine sank in less than 2 minutes with all hands lost. German tactical guidance, captured from U-boat training materials dated December 1943, revealed the complete collapse of confidence. Do not engage American destroyer escorts in surface combat under any circumstances. Their radar provides perfect fire control at night. Their gun crews are trained specifically for anti-submarine surface engagement. Their armor, thin by destroyer standards, is more than sufficient against deck gunfire. If forced to surface in presence of destroyer escorts, the crew should abandon ship immediately, rather than attempt fighting or crash dive. The latter will result in destruction of the submarine with all hands. The former offers some possibility of survival. As Allied forces prepared for Operation Overlord, destroyer escorts increasingly focused on direct invasion support. The destroyer escort DE-418 class could carry 8 landing craft, transforming them into assault transports. Later variants added rocket launchers. Each ship could deliver 1 205-inch rockets onto beach defenses during landing operations. Some were configured as radar pickets with enhanced air search radar and increased anti-aircraft armament. Later, variants added 50-caliber machine, guns and 40mm automatic cannons for surface engagement, each equivalent to the entire armament of many World War I destroyers, Admiral Royal Ingersoll noted in his analysis of anti-submarine warfare development. The destroyer escorts had evolved from specialized submarine hunters into multi-role vessels capable of convoy escort, anti-submarine warfare, surface combat, fire support, troop transport, and radar picket duty. Oberst Karl von Müller, commanding German 352nd Infantry Division during the defense of Normandy, experienced destroyer escort attacks firsthand on June 6, 1944. His account, recorded during interrogation, revealed the psychological impact of American firepower. They came in from the sea at dawn. The ships were small, not the battleships we had been told to expect. But the volume of fire was incomprehensible. Rockets by the hundreds creating smoke and fire across our entire defensive sector. Artillery shells that never ceased. The sound alone was paralyzing, a continuous roar like thunder that never ended. My bunker shook with each salvo. Communication trenches collapsed. Ammunition depots exploded from indirect hits, and this continued for hours. When I tried to move reserves forward, the ship's fire followed them. Their spotting was perfect, their corrections immediate. We could not reinforce, could not retreat, could only endure. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. These were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk. But this industrial application of violence was something beyond their experience. The enemy wasn't fighting us. They were processing us like material in a factory being transformed from soldiers into casualties. On August 14, 1944, the Kriegsmarine discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted during Operation Anvil Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. Over 70 destroyer escorts provided close-in anti-submarine coverage for the invasion fleet. German U-boat group landward, attempting to attack the invasion shipping, was systematically destroyed. Oberbootsman Heinrich Braumann, senior hydrophone operator aboard U-230, described the experience in post-war interview. We detected the invasion fleet from 90 kilometers. The hydrophone returns were so massive we initially thought equipment malfunction. But it was real, hundreds of ships. We attempted to close for torpedo attack, never got within 20 kilometers. The escorts detected us immediately. We tried diving deep. They followed us to 200 meters. Tried silent running, made no difference. Their sonar found us anyway. Tried evasion maneuvers, they predicted every turn. For 13 hours they hunted us. Depth charges falling in perfect patterns. Hedgehog attacks that bracketed us so closely, we could hear projectiles striking the seafloor beside us. Each explosion closer. Hull plates buckling. Rivets popping. Leaks appearing faster than damage control could patch them. The captain finally ordered surface surrender. We were one bulkhead failure from crush depth implosion. As we surfaced, there were 8 American escorts surrounding us. 8. All with guns trained on us before we even broke water. We weren't a threat to them. We were target practice that had ceased being entertaining. U-230 survived. U-348, U-410, U-667, and U-731 did not. 4 submarines destroyed in 3 days for 0 American losses. The Turkey shoot off southern France demonstrated that German U-boats could no longer operate anywhere the United States chose to exert sea control. Statistics revealing American industrial might painted a picture that German strategists found impossible to counter. General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Bethlehem Steel, Dravo Corporation, and 23 other American shipbuilders produced 1,005 destroyer escorts during the war. At peak production in early 1944, American shipyards completed 1 destroyer escort every 14 hours, faster than combat could sink them. The Bethlehem Hingham Shipyard in Massachusetts, built from empty marshland in 1941, was producing 30 destroyer escorts per month by mid-1944. Each destroyer escort required 47,000 individual parts, 6.2 miles of electrical wiring, 180 tons of armor plate. Yet American workers, many women who had never seen a warship before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with defect rates below 0.1%. Training comparison revealed an even more devastating disparity. By late 1944, the United States was graduating 12,000 naval officers and 350,000 enlisted sailors annually. Each destroyer escort officer received minimum 400 hours of training, including 300 hours in anti-submarine warfare, 200 hours in damage control, 180 hours in navigation. Enlisted sonar operators trained for 6 months on the exact equipment they'd use in combat, with practice against friendly submarines providing realistic experience. German submarine crews were entering combat with less than 160 hours of training by war's end, barely enough to understand the controls, much less develop the expertise needed to survive against American hunter-killer groups. In December 1944, forgotten Captain Hans-Werner Krauss, the same officer who had mocked American destroyer escorts from the safety of 180 meters depth in April 1943, was captured when his new command, U-805, was depth-charged to the surface by USS Carter and Muir northeast of the Azores. Allied intelligence officers, recognizing his name from intercepted German communications, conducted extensive interrogation. His statement, classified until 1968 because it was deemed too complete an admission of German naval defeat, revealed total transformation. The American destroyer escort is the finest anti-submarine vessel ever built. I make this statement not as propaganda. I am a prisoner with nothing to gain from flattery, but as technical assessment from someone who fought against them for 2 years. Their sonar capability is unmatched. It penetrates every depth, every temperature gradient we relied upon for concealment. Their hedgehog weapons never miss, or more accurately, if they miss, the submarine never knows because there's no explosion to mark failure. When hedgehog hits, the submarine dies. Their depth charges explode with force that cracks pressure hulls at ranges we thought were safe. They carry enough weapons for extended engagement. Where British corvettes would exhaust depth charges after 4 patterns, the American escorts could attack for hours. But beyond the machines is what they represent: unlimited American production. They lose 10 escorts, they build 30. We lose 1 submarine, it's gone forever. The crew, the training, the experience vanished. Their crews arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for extended patrol. They have ammunition for practice. They have replacement parts when equipment breaks. We have nothing but courage remaining, and courage without resources is just delayed death. We laughed at them in 1943. We called them floating shoeboxes. We mocked their crude construction and slow speed. We believed German naval architecture was superior, that our submarines with their pressure hulls rated to 250 meters, their electrical torpedo systems, their sophisticated hydrophones, could never be matched by American mass production. We were wrong about everything. The Americans understood something we didn't. The war would not be won by building the perfect submarine or the perfect escort. It would be won by building adequate vessels in such overwhelming numbers that quality became irrelevant. Their destroyer escorts were adequate, more than adequate, and they built 1,000 of them while we were still drawing blueprints for advanced types. When you hear that distinctive diesel rumble on hydrophones, you know death has arrived. The sound haunts us. It haunted me every patrol from summer 1943 onward. Mechanical, persistent, patient, inevitable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority applied with systematic efficiency. They don't need brilliant tactics when they can just outlast you. Can't need individual excellence when they can deploy 20 ships to find 1 submarine. Don't need advanced technology when adequate technology produced in vast numbers achieves the same result. In 1943, I sat at 180 meters listening to them pass overhead, writing in my log how primitive they sounded. By 1944, I prayed every patrol that I wouldn't hear that sound, because once they found you, you were finished. It was just a matter of time. The final statistics defied comprehension. German U-boat force lost 783 submarines during World War II, 632 to Allied action, 151 to accidents and other causes. Of the 632 destroyed by Allied forces, American destroyer escorts and escort carrier groups were credited with 361 confirmed kills. Over half, 28,000 German submariners died, a 75% casualty rate, highest of any military branch in any nation during the war. In exchange, U-boats sank 175 Allied warships and 2,179 merchant ships totaling 14.1 million tons. But from mid-1943 onward, as destroyer escorts deployed in numbers, sinking rates collapsed, from 547.44 tons lost in June 1943 to 61,000 tons in July, to 25,000 tons in August. By 1945, U-boats were sinking an average of 14,000 tons monthly, less than 1/50th the 1942 rate, while suffering unsustainable losses. In 1947, at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, the Navy hosted a symposium on anti-submarine warfare, inviting former adversaries to provide perspective. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, former commander of the U-boat force, now released from imprisonment, was asked about the destroyer escort program. His response, recorded by naval historians, was remarkably candid. "We made two fundamental errors in 1943. First, we underestimated American industrial capacity. We knew abstractly that United States could produce vessels in great numbers. We did not understand that great numbers meant hundreds per year, not dozens. Second, we confused simplicity with primitiveness. The destroyer escorts appeared crude to us. Welded construction instead of riveted merchant marine engines instead of naval turbines. Simple lines instead of sophisticated curves. We interpreted this as evidence of inferior capability. In reality, it was evidence of superior strategic thinking. The Americans designed a vessel that could be built by workers with minimal training, in shipyards that had never built warships, using components produced across their entire industrial base. And that vessel, despite appearing unsophisticated, incorporated the most advanced sonar and weapons in existence. They prioritized function over form, effectiveness over elegance, production over perfection. By the time we understood what they had built, that these crude escorts were actually specialized submarine killers with capabilities exceeding any dedicated anti-submarine vessel in European service. They had produced hundreds of them. We couldn't sink them faster than American shipyards built them. And each one that deployed meant one more area of ocean where our submarines couldn't operate safely. By mid-1944, we had lost the Atlantic not because our submarines were inferior, though by then they were, but because the Americans had made the ocean itself hostile territory. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to surface, nowhere to recharge, nowhere to repair. They owned the sea from surface to crush depth, from coast to coast. The destroyer escorts were the instrument of that dominance. When I heard in 1943 that Americans were building escort vessels with diesel engines and merchant construction techniques, I was relieved. I thought it meant they were desperate, resorting to inferior stopgaps. I should have been terrified, because it meant they had solved the essential problem: how to build adequate anti-submarine vessels faster than we could build submarines. Once that equation tilted in their favor, our defeat was inevitable. We just didn't realize it yet. The destroyer escort program didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic with brilliance. It won with systematic industrial application of adequate capability in overwhelming quantity. That's very American, and it was unstoppable. The destroyer escort represented American military philosophy: simplicity, producibility, and overwhelming quantity. These were not the elegant creations of naval architects pursuing perfection. They were the functional products of industrial engineers solving a problem with brutal efficiency. They sacrificed grace for capacity, tradition for effectiveness, naval heritage for rapid production. The Germans had spent the war building U-boats that couldn't be matched: Type WWII with underwater speed exceeding surface speeds, Type CIC with pressure hulls that could reach 300 meters, advanced snorkel systems allowing submerged diesel operation. The Americans built destroyer escorts that made German submarine capabilities irrelevant. Speed didn't matter when sonar tracked through every evasion. Depth rating didn't matter when weapons could reach any depth submarines could survive. Advanced systems didn't matter when the submarine was hunted continuously by vessels that never ran out of fuel. Weapons or patience. Korvettenkapitan Kraus had laughed at the destroyer escorts in April 1943, watching them from the safety of 180 meters, listening to their ungainly diesel rumble, reading their clumsy maneuvers. By December 1944, there were no German submarine commanders left to laugh. Those who survived had learned that the rumble of General Motors diesels meant death, that the ugly welded hulls contained sonar that saw through the ocean, that the simple depth charge racks held weapons that could crack pressure hulls at depths German submarines thought were sanctuary. That American patience and American production had transformed what looked like floating shoeboxes into instruments of systematic destruction. The thunder of hedgehog salvos had spoken across the Atlantic, and the ocean belonged to America. The U-boats still sailed, still tried to fight, still died with courage. But they died nonetheless, sunk by crude vessels built by riveting crews who had never seen the sea, tracked by sonar operators who had been farmers and shopkeepers, destroyed by weapons that didn't look impressive but worked with mechanical precision. The Germans had built the finest submarines in the world. The Americans had built 1,000 destroyer escorts, and in the mathematics of industrial warfare, quantity had quality all its own.